The Indie Spot presents a recap of the movie, The Pursuit of Happyness, released in 2006. The movie opens with Chris, who sells medical devices for a living. As part of his daily routine, he drops off his son Christopher at daycare and afterward heads to various hospitals that might need what he's selling. While having dinner, Linda asks him if he has already paid the taxes, and Chris tells her that he has to file another extension, making Linda more stressed. The following day, while walking down the street, he sees a businessman. Chris asks the man what he does for a living, and the man tells him that he's a stockbroker, and they both have a brief interaction. The morning after, Chris tells Linda he will apply to be a stockbroker. Linda thinks it's ridiculous. Chris heads to a brokerage firm to use. However, Chris leaves his medical device with a street performer because he does not want to go inside carrying it. While applying for the job, he sees the street performer running away with the device, prompting Chris to leave quickly. However, the street performer manages to get away. Chris heads to Dean Witter and personally delivers a filled-up application form to Dean's resource head Jay. However, their interaction is brief because Jay is in a hurry. After dropping off the application form, Chris sees the street performer and her accomplice carrying the stolen device. Chris angrily chases them. After chasing the two, he finally gets his device back. Later that day, Chris talks to Jay while he's hailing a taxi. Chris tells him about the application form he submitted a month ago, but Jay tells him he must go somewhere. Chris then takes this as an opportunity to talk to Jay by telling him he's going to the same place. That day, Chris calls Linda to apologize for not being on time, furious that she missed her shift. Linda tells Chris that she and Christopher are leaving. Chris goes home to find his wife and son, but they are gone. However, just then, he receives a call from Jay telling him to write down his secretary's number so they can talk tomorrow. The following day, Chris confronts Linda, who has just dropped off their son at the daycare. After Linda tells him she's unhappy, Chris allows her to leave, but says she can't take their son. Later that day, Chris brings his son home. Chris sees two policemen telling him to go to the station. Chris pays for the parking ticket at the police station, but the police officer tells him it will be verified at 9 a.m. Chris has no choice but to call Linda to care for their son while he's gone for the day. Linda accepts. Because of this, he stays at the station for the night. The following day, Chris runs for the interview at Dean because he has no time to change. He goes there still wearing his clothes from the day before. Chris arrives, much to the noticeable disappointment of the panel. He then tells the meeting that he got arrested yesterday for failing to pay parking tickets. In the end, Chris manages to make the panel laugh. Afterward, Jay congratulated Chris for successfully interviewing without wearing formal attire. However, Chris tells him he'll think about the job because he learns there is an intern period where he will not be paid, but Jay urges him to continue. After the interview, Chris heads to his house, waiting for his wife and son to arrive. Linda arrives with Christopher. That night, while Christopher is asleep, Linda tells Chris she's heading to New York to work as a waitress. Chris agrees, but only if their son stays with him. Linda believes that Chris can care for their son, so she tearfully leaves them for good. The following day, the father and son moved 2 blocks down to a nearby motel with the help of Chris' friend. They then head to a hospital to sell their medical device, and the hospital agrees to buy it. Chris then starts the internship to learn about the trade. During the lunch break, Chris meets and greets Martin in the street. However, their conversation has to be cut short because Chris spots the device he left behind during his earlier escape from the taxi driver. Chris then chases after the guy carrying the device but fails because he gets hit by a car. Chris discovers he has lost his shoe, so he returns with the missing shoe to the program. The following day, Chris goes to the house of the CEO and tells him they are going to the football game. Mr. Ribbon then invites his father and son to come with them. Seeing this as an opportunity, Chris and Christopher go with Mr. Ribbon and his son. During the game, Mr. Ribbon tells him that while he likes Chris, he is unlikely to accept his offer. The IRS takes some money from Chris's bank account to pay his unpaid taxes. Because of this, he is now broke. To have a bit of money, Chris asks his friend for the money he owes. However, his friend thinks it was already paid, and they drive the father and son to the motel. Chris becomes frustrated with this. Later that day, Chris sees and finally retrieves the device that he had left earlier. They then immediately head from place to sell the device, only to find out it's broken, while the hospital will still pay for it when it gets fixed. Chris feels distressed. In the next scene, Chris and his son go to a homeless shelter, but get rejected because only women and children are allowed. Fortunately, they get a room in another homeless shelter. Chris attempts to fix the device. The following day, Chris managed to finish his exam quickly. While going out, Mr. Frost asks Chris to lend him some money. Despite only having a limited amount, Chris still lends him $5. To earn money, Chris donates blood. He then uses the money to buy a part of his fixing device. At the homeless shelter, Chris successfully fixes the machine. The following day, he sells the device, earning them just enough money to sleep in a hotel. In the next scene, Jay congratulates Chris on his final day for securing many clients. Afterward, Chris gets called by Mr. Freich, who leads Chris to Mr. Frome. Mr. Frome informs him that he has a full-time job. Chris, struggling to hold back tears, thanks the panel, and Mr. Frome returns the $5 he borrowed from him. Chris then heads straight to his son in the daycare and hugs him tight. The film reveals that Chris manages to establish his investment firm. It is shown that Chris has secured a multi-million-dollar deal. I like the story and will advise you to watch it the first chance you get.